And now we can go ahead and get started. So hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Annie Gaines. I'm the CE consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. And today we're having a webinar on developing welcoming spaces and programs for LGBTQ youth. I'm joined today by Bri DeMaree and Jenny Liebig from the Meridian Library District, who are here to share their perspective. So on behalf of the Commission for Libraries and our funding partner, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Bri and Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Just get our presentation shared. Here we go.
All right. So thanks for joining us today. Like Annie said, we're here for developing welcoming spaces and programs for LGBTQ plus youth. We're here to talk about a specific program that's been successful for us at the Meridian Library District, but also ways that public, school, academic libraries can develop welcoming spaces for people of all ages. So our experience is mainly with youth, but we will be talking about things that can be applied to library services in general that support the LGBTQ community. So I'm Jenny Liebig. I use she, her pronouns. I have a background in English, secondary education, and Arctic ecology. I've been the teen specialist at Meridian Library District for the past 5 years, where I work mainly with middle school and high school students.
Hi, I am Bri DeMaree. I use they, them pronouns. I have worked at the Meridian Library for 8 years in various different positions, and right now am the material distribution coordinator, which means I coordinate our home delivery service. The photo is of my cat Nia, who likes to investigate when I start talking at my computer. So you may see her, you may not. Let's hope for not.
We'd also like to introduce you to QSA. We're going to say QSA a lot. This is what we call our main program for LGBTQ youth. It stands for Queer Straight Alliance. Spoiler alert, we are going to talk about why we chose that name later on.
Yes, and lastly, we have our mascot, Roy G. Biv, nicknamed Roy. Roy uses they, them pronouns, and they are our QSA's mascot and talking tool. So when we would meet in person, if you had Roy, you got the opportunity to share and everyone would listen. We also would like to share a quick thank you to our QSA member, August, for creating the wonderful art that you see on our screen.
Very cute.
Okay, so this is an outline of what we are going to be talking about today. We'd first like to introduce the concept of respect, effort, and attitude, and to always approach the LGBT plus community or any marginalized community with these 3 things, meaning you have a respect for the community and their experiences. You make an effort to understand this community. So you do your own research, you find definitions, podcasts, TED Talks, etc. And you do all of these things with a genuine attitude that is willing to learn. With these things in mind, I just like to say that it is okay to be wrong. Maybe you will get a name or a definition wrong one day. It's fine. If you are approaching a marginalized community with these 3 things, just apologize briefly and people will understand that it was a harmless mistake. And besides, you are doing one of these 3 things by being here today with us. You are making an effort to understand the LGBTQ plus community and what you can do for them. So again, thank you for being here today. So what we'll be talking about today is first some terms and labels that you will often hear associated with the LGBT plus community. And then Jenny will share data from the School Climate GLSEN 2019 project, which will illustrate why we are here talking about this. Then we'll share how we started our QSA group at the Meridian Library. And lastly, some inclusive library and customer service practices you may be able to implement. Firstly, though, we would like to make sure everyone shares the same base knowledge when starting this presentation. So first, we're going to define sexual orientation. This means how a person identifies who they are physically attracted to. The same gender, the opposite gender, two genders, all genders, etc. These terms are the terms that you hear with the word sexual in it usually: homosexual, pansexual, bisexual, asexual. Gender identity and gender orientation is how a person perceives their gender and their relationship to their gender. Transgender people are people who identify with the opposite gender they were assigned at birth. Non-binary person means that their gender identity does not match the heteronormative male and female gender identities. And cisgender is used for people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. All right, so if there is a word you hear today, feel free to put it in the chat or hang on to it, and Jenny and I will do our best to answer. So some of you may have seen this very long acronym before. To refresh, and for those who don't, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, pansexual, two-spirited, asexual, and aromantic or allied, depending on who you're talking to. But we still have this wonderful plus because there are still more identities. For example, non-binary, polyamorous, demigirl. There are so many others, and there's terms being invented every day. So when we're talking about terms and definitions, it's important to remember that everything within the community is a spectrum. Gender, sexuality, romantic orientation, aesthetic attraction, all of these things can flow like this arrow here from one side to another, depending on the person and their own understanding of their identity. The words that we use in this acronym are simply labels or buttons, as our QSA kids like to call them, that we can use to communicate and identify by. These words exist in order to be helpful for us to be able to share our experience with each other and to show each other that we're not alone in how we feel and look at the world. And a common misunderstanding is that these are not to be used to put someone into boxes. A lot of people feel that they do because there's a lot of stigma against saying, oh, I'm lesbian, and then a couple of years later saying, maybe I'm pan. We experience this a lot in our QSA group of teens who want to use a different label, but then have a lot of guilt and anxiety about switching to that label because they feel like the group will think that they are being deceitful and lying to them. But this is simply not true. We use the term label or button for a reason, and that is that you can peel it off, take it off, and pick up another one, and it shouldn't cause any judgment from others. For example, there was a girl in our QSA who, when she first started coming, identified as asexual and homo-romantic. However, as she started exploring herself and her relationships, she came to the conclusion that she did not identify as asexual anymore. She was incredibly anxious to tell us, especially me as another asexual person. It caused her a lot of stress for quite a few days. But when she finally did tell us, I did my best to reassure her it wouldn't change our relationship anyway. I didn't try to convince her otherwise or explain the nuances of what being asexual means. I just said, okay, yes, a person can choose a label or not choose a label. It's completely up to them. Okay, so now we are going to talk about gender identity in a bit more detail. This is the gender unicorn created by Landon Pan and Anna Moore for the Trans Student website. And first we have gender identity, which is represented by this rainbow thought bubble up at the top here. This is how we perceive our relationship with our gender and how we choose to interpret that relationship. And the graphic has it broken down into 3 arrows with female, male, and other. And this is because someone can identify on all 3 of them at the same time. So maybe they're a lot female, a little male, and maybe neutral in the other. The next section is gender expression, represented by these dots here to the left. This is how we show and express our gender identity, most commonly with clothes and hairstyle. This does not affect a person's gender identity. A person who identifies as a woman can wear a tuxedo. A person who identifies as a man can wear a dress. And a person who is non-binary, like myself, can dress however I please. Most of the time I choose to go for androgynous or a bit more male. I don't wear makeup of any kind, which is usually seen as female. And this is just how I choose to interpret and show myself to the world. It doesn't change my gender identity. So the next section is sex assigned at birth, and this is represented by the DNA just for helix. That's double helix. I know science. Here at the bottom, and separated into female, male, and other. Now, you will commonly see sex assigned at birth as assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, or the acronyms AFAB and AMAB. This is only what biological sex, what bits and pieces you were born with. If a person was born female at birth, and now we're getting the cat. If a person was born female, oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
You got this,
If
Mia.
a person was born female at birth and identifies as female, the term most commonly used to describe that person is cisgender. If a person identifies as neither male or female, they could identify as non-binary or a different term. And then also lastly, the other section is also important to recognize because this is where many intersex people choose to identify outside of the binary of female and male. Next, we have who you are physically attracted to, represented by the orange heart on the right. This is commonly referred to as a person's sexuality. For example, homosexual means you're attracted to the same gender, heterosexual, the opposite gender, pansexual, all genders, etc., etc. Then we have the red heart to the left, which is who you are emotionally attracted to or romantically attracted to. This is sometimes encompassed by a person's sexuality. Many people who identify as gay, lesbian, or pansexual are also romantically attracted to who they are sexually attracted to, so the same gender, the opposite gender, etc. But it could not be that simple for some people. Maybe someone is physically attracted to the same gender, but romantically attracted to all genders. It's completely up to them and how they feel and how they choose to express their identity.
So now some numbers. So we know that there is a high need for programs and services that target LGBTQ teens, but I would like to go over some of the reasons that we know that, some of the data that demonstrate this. The numbers in the next few slides come from the National School Climate Survey. This is run every 2 years by GLSEN. GLSEN, you can see their acronym here. It stands for the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. They've been around since the 90s. You can find more information on this survey and then reports on survey data going back to, I think their 2001 survey is the earliest one, on their website, glisten.org. So these numbers are from the most recent report they have The report from the survey in 2019. They just finished the 2021 survey this year, and so the reporting on that will come out in 2022. But these responses from 2019 represent more than 16,000 6th through 12th graders across the country and what their experiences in school are. So the first bit I would like to share is that the survey found that 86% of LGBTQ plus students have been harassed or assaulted at school. Harassment is more common and harder to define than assault, so I want to define it in this context. Harassment means written, verbal, or physical conduct that adversely affects the ability of students to participate in or benefit from school's educational programs or activities, specifically because the conduct is severe and or persistent and or pervasive. One common form of harassment that LGBTQ students experience is anti-LGBTQ language. So something like slurs or hate speech, something like the word gay being used as a derogatory term, phrase no homo, or straight up homophobic and transphobic remarks. So it's important also to note that that could come from peers, but also could come from teachers, administrators, or school staff. So all of those different things are covered when the students who take the survey report their experiences. You might also have trans students experiencing harassment by being prevented from using bathrooms or locker rooms that align with their gender, by being prevented from using the name and pronouns that are part of their identity, and being prevented from participating on sports teams or wearing clothes that they choose. So we know that harassment like these can lead to students feeling unsafe at school. So on this slide, we have the second statistic we'd like to point out from the national data. 84% of trans students reported feeling unsafe at school because of their gender. So a feeling unsafe at school illustrates a really important aspect of the harassment from the other slide. Harassment can be official or unofficial or some combination of the two. What I mean by that is safety isn't necessarily reflective of policy. So on the issue of a trans student being prevented from using bathrooms that align with their gender, so let's say a trans girl is prevented from using the girls' bathrooms or locker rooms because the school says she has to use the bathroom that matches her legal gender. She was assigned male at birth and that's on her school record. So they say that she has to use that bathroom. So that could be one way of preventing her from using the facilities that she wants to use. But it could also be that the school has no problem allowing her access to use girls' spaces, but she doesn't feel comfortable because of other kinds of harassment, teasing or bullying from peers, lack of support from teachers and school staff. So one of those is more of a policy thing and one of them is more of a climate thing. But both could lead to the feeling of unsafety at school. So either way, she's prevented from using the girls' bathroom. And that is something that happens a lot. Many trans students end up avoiding gender segregated spaces. And so I also just want to remind that trans is an umbrella term, so that includes trans boys and girls as well as gender fluid and non-binary folks that Bri was talking about earlier. And students who are gender fluid or non-binary do not usually have good options when being made to use gendered spaces or gendered sports teams or things like that. And so then also for this slide, I wanted to talk about, so when we're talking about safety, it's important to remember that not all trans students feel safe enough to be out at school, or gay students and lesbian students also. But in this case, we're talking about trans students who may not feel safe enough to be out at school. So this survey includes trans students who present themselves at school in a way that aligns with their gender identity, and also the students who present themselves at school as the gender they were assigned at birth, perhaps because of feeling unsafe at school or some other reason that can affect whether you're out or not. So the GLSEN survey also found that LGBTQ students feel so unsafe and uncomfortable in their schools that they are missing days of school and avoiding school activities. GLSEN reported that 32%, nearly 1/3 of LGBTQ students who responded to the survey had missed at least one day of school in the previous month. So they asked about the month before they took the survey. And some had missed more than one day of school. And that's not counting school missed for other reasons, illness, family emergency, or something like that. So discrimination and harassment and missed school can also contribute to lower GPAs for LGBTQ students, and going beyond academic achievement to teens' health and well-being, to lower self-esteem. So lower self-esteem is related to some negative health outcomes such as self-harm, depression, suicidal ideation. So on the next slide, we included some findings from another 2019 report from a different organization that LGBTQ young people are more than 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. This comes from the Trevor Project, which is a crisis intervention organization that serves LGBTQ youth. The Trevor Project found in 2019 that over 1.8 million LGBTQ young people in the US consider suicide each year. So we're going to go back to the GLSEN data in a minute and look at some numbers specific to Idaho, but it's important to remember that we're not just talking about lower grades or less favorable educational outcomes. Safe and supportive communities and schools can be a matter of life and death for LGBTQ teens. So the next 2 graphs will give us a closer look at the data from the climate survey, but for Idaho in particular. So this is from the state snapshot of Idaho. GLSEN has state snapshots from the 2019 school climate survey for 40 of the 50 states. Not every state had the data to support it, but those are all on glisten.org if there's another state where you live or work or are interested in details. This figure that we're looking at right here for Idaho is about harassment and assault. I want to spend a couple extra seconds looking at the axes and labels to make sure we know what we're looking at. The x-axis along the bottom has a scale that represents the percentage of students who have experienced harassment or assault. So bigger numbers on this bar graph are bad. They mean bigger numbers mean more students having had negative or unsafe experiences in school. The labels on the different shades there in the bottom right are show that we're looking separately at verbal harassment, physical assault, and the labels on the y-axis on the left divide harassment by topic. So whether it's related to sexual orientation, gender expression, or gender. So remember the gender unicorn that Bri talked about just a minute ago. Gender and gender identity is internal in your mind, how you relate to yourself and your gender, and gender expression is about appearance and outward behaviors, things like that. So that's why those are split up there on the graph. So let's put together the y-axis, the x-axis, and the 3 different shades, put them together using the helpful subtitle in parentheses under our title here. It says percentage of LGBTQ students harassed or assaulted in the past year based on ... We can turn that into a fill-in-the-blank question that the graph will answer. For example, what percent of LGBTQ students in Idaho experienced physical assault, so that's the darkest color bar, based on their gender expression, that's the middle section of bars, and we have 14% of students responded that they had experienced harassment and assault related to gender expression, or sorry, a physical assault related to gender expression. So looking at the graph overall, you can see, as we'd expect, that there are lower rates of physical assault than verbal harassment. Verbal harassment is much more common in all categories. But I also want to connect this to the other number we saw before. So before we move on, a few slides ago, we saw 86% of LGBTQ students nationally reported being harassed or assaulted at school. I bring it up because the highest number on this figure is 70%, but this is not asking the same question as the question that 86% said. So we cannot, using this figure, say, for example, that Idaho is below the national average, even though 70 is lower than 86. That statistic was lumping something different, essentially asking the question, have you experienced harassment or assault at school? This one separates it out. This figure separates it out. So for example, one student could say, no, I have not been harassed based on my sexual orientation, but they may say, yes, I have been harassed based on my gender. So that being said, it's kind of an apples and oranges. So to compare more directly, I do have numbers from the national report. They aren't on this chart, but for comparison's sake, we'll look at the lightest bars only on this chart. Starting from the top, we have 60, 70, 60, and 63%. And 70, so the bigger numbers are bad. Again, we don't want big numbers. And for the national data, those same numbers in order are 69%, 57%, and 54%. So 70 in Idaho compared to 69 nationally, 60 in Idaho, 57 nationally, 63 in Idaho, 54 nationally. So Idaho is close to, but slightly higher than the national average for experiences of harassment and assault in situations like this. So on the next slide, this figure shows the availability of LGBTQ related resources and supports in Idaho schools. So these are good things. These are things that we want to be in schools. And starting at the x-axis again, down at the bottom, again, we have percents, but this time it's the percent of students who report that they do have access to the resource or support listed on the left. So that means on this side, bigger numbers are good. We want bigger numbers. And going down the list of resources on the left there, these are things that help students feel safe and supported in school. And like the last slide, I have the national numbers for comparison. So first is a comprehensive anti-bullying policy. Comprehensive in this case meaning that the policy addresses specifically sexual orientation and gender identity in the policy. So only 10% of students in Idaho say that their school provides this kind of policy. And that's compared to 13% nationally, just a little bit higher. Next is the resource that has the least accessibility in Idaho, and that's a supportive trans and non-binary student policy. An example of this kind of policy could be, so a couple years ago in QSA, we had a trans boy in our group, and he was in concert band at his high school. And so he was out at school, he had parent support, he talked to his counselor about being trans and his teachers about being trans. He was using he, him pronouns at school. He was using his masculine name at school, but his official school paperwork had marked down female, so the gender assigned at birth. So when his band concerts came around, they said he had to follow girls' performance attire and wear a dress. He and his parents objected and argued he should be able to dress like the other boys in the concert band, but he ended up with an entire school year of dressing for concerts in clothes that negatively affected his safety and comfort. The good news is the school did eventually change their rules. I have to tell you, it was a very celebratory QSA meeting the day that he came in and said, guess what, guys, I can finally wear pants for band concerts. But so that's an example of what a supportive policy would be allowing students to choose what to wear in situations where gendered uniforms or dress are required for whatever reason. So for this one, only 7% of Idaho students say that their school has supportive policies in place for trans students, and that's compared to 11% nationally. So the next one down is that 37% say that they have supportive administration in their Idaho schools, compared to 42% nationally. That's kind of administration as a whole. 52% say that they can identify 6 or more supportive educators in their school, and that's quite a bit lower. It's compared to 66% of students nationally. The next one is a bigger difference too. So GSA, like we've been talking about, can stand for Gay Straight Alliance or Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And 44% of Idaho students say they have access to a club like this in their school. That's quite a bit less than the 61% that's the national average. So lack of access to a GSA was the initial motivation for starting our QSA group that we're going to talk about in a bit here. And if we go down one more, we have inclusive curriculum. So that refers to things like positive representations of LGBTQ people, inclusive sex ed classes, things like that. For inclusive curriculum, we can compare Idaho's number of 13% students who have access to 19% nationally. And last, we have, for my library audience, we have students access to inclusive library resources. So there's definitely room for improvement, but go Idaho school librarians, because out of this list, this is the number that's closest to the national average, which is 47 compared to 49. So Idaho is below the national average in each one of these categories of supports and resources. But to be clear, the national average is not all that impressive either. The entire country can do better for our LGBTQ students. And doing better is easier said than done. But on the next slide, GLSEN offers some recommendations for improving school climate for queer kids. So again, this report, these recommendations are school-based, but the things kids need to feel safe and supported at school are more or less the same things they need to feel safe and supported in their communities. So where GLSEN suggests things like on this slide, like establishing a comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policy, offering GSA clubs, fostering supportive teachers and school staff, teaching LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. We've tweaked that on the next slide to make the recommendations apply to public libraries where we work. So public libraries can support LGBTQ patrons by providing anti-discriminatory customer service that is gender neutral and gender inclusive, by offering GSAs and other inclusive programming, by fostering supportive library staff, and by maintaining LGBTQ plus inclusive collections, fiction, nonfiction, everything. And so while the numbers we just went over in the other slides kind of paint some of the picture of how important it is to implement some of these supports, there's nothing like a good story. So I have a story from one of the first teens who made coming to QSA a big part of her week. She shared her experience with us a couple years ago when we had asked our patrons for stories of how Meridian Library District had impacted their lives. And she gave me permission to share her message as long as I took her name off. So on the slide, you can see the redacted screenshot of her message that came into our Instagram account. She writes, "I'm 16 years old. I've grown up going to the library and I love it there. I also happen to be a lesbian, and MLD has been such a blessing in my journeys in questioning and coming out. The library has given me access to resources I wouldn't otherwise have as a closeted teen who is still financially reliant on her parents. The library gave me access to books normalizing LGBTQ people. It gave me knowledge that there are others like me, that I am not broken. It gave me the amazing support system I have in the Queer Straight Alliance there. Specifically, the QSA has been such a fantastic experience. I look forward to going there every Friday. MLD has made me feel comfortable in my identity, and it's helped me help others feel comfortable in theirs, and I can't thank them enough." So many thanks to this anonymous teen who made me cry by sharing her story with us. I promise we did not coach her on this message, but it definitely kind of sounds like we did because she hit all the notes that Bri and I are going for, such as access to resources and books, having a support system, having a meeting that you look forward to every week. So that is our segue to talking about those meetings and the history of the ins and outs of our program.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, for all explaining to us poor non-math people what numbers mean. Well done. So I get the pleasure of reciting our somewhat complicated history, starting our QSA group. And just as a note, the next few slides are going to be specifically about how we started our QSA group and what we do in our meetings that might inspire you to start your own or might give you some ideas for how you can be more inclusive in your programming. So QSA was born because both Jenny and I had teens that trusted us ask for the program. They didn't, or still don't in many cases, have a GSA club at their school, and they wanted and needed a support and a social group. So we talked to our admin at the Meridian Library who were in support of the program, but we were all cautious about how the community of Meridian might react. And so we decided to, at first, be discreet in what we called it, and we decided to call it Libraries Are for Everyone. We began planning the program by going to at the time, 2 GSA clubs in West Ada's Meridian High School district. We asked the kids there what they would like to see the library offer in the program and if they'd spread the word about it to their friends. And then we started our weekly meetings, and we decided to host them weekly so that we could build a connection in our teens' minds that this program was always going to be here and was going to be here to stay. At first, attendance was very low, but slowly, by word of mouth, people spread the word, and we ended up having a steady base of 10 to 15 kids coming every week. This has drastically changed because we are now online in Discord, which Jenny and our other teen program specialist, Trevor, created, and it's wonderful, but now we have very low numbers. We still have quite a lot of fun though. Eventually though, we decided that we needed to change the name from Libraries Are for Everyone to Queer Straight Alliance. We knew that this might prevent some of our more closeted patrons from attending the group, but we also knew that it would garner more attention from the LGBTQ teens that weren't attending. We also realized that it was important for these young kids to realize that we weren't trying to hide their existence with a discrete name. We wanted to celebrate them and support them. And so we changed the name. And this picture is from one of our meetings in 2018 where the kids painted a rainbow flag and put handprints on one of our ceiling tiles in the teen space. And it's still there, and I love looking at it. So why did we choose Queer Straight Alliance as our name instead of Gender and Sexuality Alliance or Gay Straight Alliance? Well, firstly, we chose straight because straight acts as a safety net for the kids who haven't come out yet, for whatever reason that is. You also do get some straight allies that come, but it is mainly there to act as the safety net. And it gives them a way to have the community that they need, even if they can't come out yet, or maybe won't come out. For example, we had a teen who first started coming to meetings for their friends, but gradually they felt comfortable coming out to the group in multiple ways and multiple times with different labels or buttons. And they also started dating within the group as well. And it was wonderful just to see their progression and be able to see that the group was working as a support system for people. Okay, so now we know that the big thing to address here is why we chose the word queer. Because queer has been used as a slur and an insult in the past and in the present for the LGBTQ plus community. However, Jenny and I feel that the word queer is more encompassing than gay, straight alliance, and is just generally more inclusive, which was very important to us as a library program because we wanted to make sure that all kids of all identities were coming. We also feel that the word queer should not be only allowed to be an insult. It is a valid identifying label for people. I've met people who use the word queer as their identity because it's what suits them best. The LGBTQ plus community, we can't let hurtful people try and take our language from us. Which is why we decided to use the word queer in short and simple terms. It also allows us to have this conversation with the kids that come who are wondering why we're using it. And we can help show them that they can be empowered by the word queer.
Yes, I knew it was my turn to talk about this slide. So GSA style clubs tend to be some kind of combination of socializing, support, education, activism, and ours is a heavily social club. The socializing is really kind of the sneaky way of laying the foundation to make that support network. That's where it all comes from, but it's mostly social club. And we're not involved in activism per se. We do have education and discussions though. So we'll do readings, we'll show videos on various LGBTQ education topics, queer people in history, things like that. But some of the things that we do in our meetings, so like we talked about, meetings are weekly. They're currently online on Discord, a text and voice chat platform. But we're looking forward to the day when they're in person again. They're open to middle school and high school students when we're in person, and due to Discord's terms of service, teens 13 through 18 on Discord. So meetings always start with circle time. Circle time for us means introductions, sharing the highs and lows of the week, and responding to conversation prompts that are designed to facilitate open communication, get people comfortable with each other. Icebreakers, but the word icebreaker just scares so many people, so maybe don't use it. So sometimes the circle time actually takes up our whole meeting, even though, sorry, I lost my, okay. Sometimes circle time takes up our whole meeting, even though it's meant to be the introduction to the meeting, but that's because we'll have a discussion prompt that will launch us on a group conversation. We'll wander into a topic that teens want to talk about. So one day during a circle part of the meeting, one of the teens just kind of stopped and said, "Hey, can I ask everybody something? What did your parents say when you came out?" And that day, Bri and I scrapped all the rest of our plans because the rest of the meeting was just the teens sharing coming out stories or reasons they weren't ready to talk to their families yet. And when they get into that kind of discussion, I mean, that's really what we're there for. We also frequently include books in our meetings. So sometimes this is a book talk for something we'd like to recommend. Sometimes it's a mini story time with a picture book that has LGBTQ representation. Sometimes it's a reading or short story from a chapter of a YA novel or something like that. And so then we'll also recognize Pride Days, Awareness Days, Visibility Days, and use them as opportunities to talk about different pockets of the queer community, recommend media that has representation of different identities, if there is any, hopefully there is, and maybe make some different kinds of flag pins that have different Pride identities represented by them. Some of the calendar days that I'm talking about are more celebratory and about visibility, and some are a bit more somber and are about remembrance. So for example, yesterday was World AIDS Day. This coming Wednesday is Pansexual Pride Day. Our group also likes party games as well as drawing, crafting, writing poetry. Crafts and games maybe are LGBTQ related, but they aren't always, because the important part is the community and the relationship building. Although, of course, if at all possible for craft time, we will dig out the rainbow art supplies because rainbow colored crafting is very fun. And then last on this list, I have guest speakers because the teens like talking to real life queer adults as kind of a way to picture themselves in the future, to hear others' experiences. So when we invite a guest speaker, the format often kind of ends up being an informal ask me anything style group interview with them, where the teens will ask them things like, when did you come out? What's your relationship with your family like? What kind of anime do you watch? So this is a great option also for library staff like me. I'm straight and cisgender, and I want to give the kids opportunities to meet other adults with other identities.
Now, if you start a GSA or QSA, or if you put yourself out there to show that you are being welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community, when you're building relationships with these youth, you are inevitably going to have someone come out to you. So what do you do when this happens? Always believe what they are saying. This is the biggest thing you can do to show that you are supporting them. If you don't question what they are saying, don't ask if it's a phase, don't ask, are you sure? Just say, yes, okay. And then we can go into the other questions. Ask what they want you to call them in the library or among their friends, and what pronouns they want you to use in that situation. If they don't know yet, or if they're the same, that's fine. Then another important thing to ask is what they want you to call them around their family or their peers. Depending on how comfortable they are being out, the answer could differ. And the last thing that you want to do is out them. So outing is when a person reveals another person's sexual, romantic, gender, identity, etc., without that person's express permission. This can force them out of the closet earlier than they feel comfortable with, and possibly put them in danger depending on what their situation is like. So this is why it's important to ask them what they want to be called among their peers and in general in the library, because we have a lot of people who are passing through because they are public spaces that these kids may not feel comfortable being out to. We've had a lot of kids in our QSA group who have asked us to use their birth names if we ever encounter their parents, and have asked us to use their birth names if they're not in a QSA meeting any other time. This just depends on their comfortability. Another great example from our library is that our volunteer coordinator, Pamela, has put on our teen volunteer intake form questions asking what their pronouns are and if there is another name that she should use if she has to contact them via their parents. Lastly, remember that coming out is scary, and it takes a lot of bravery and trust in both you and the person who is coming out. So always have respect for this person and always make an effort to understand them and have a kind attitude while you're talking to them and helping them through this process. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears into customer service and what you can do in your library spaces. Now, we know that customer service is a varied and wild beast, and all of these things may not apply to you, but take what you feel is appropriate and hopefully you'll be able to successfully implement it. So the first thing that you can change is the appearance of yourself and your library. If you wear lanyards or name tags at work, you can add a rainbow button or a sticker. Both Jenny and I on our lanyards wear pronoun pins. You can see my little tiny one up here.
Got mine on my lapel today.
Yep. And then we both have trans rights buttons, which is this one here. And I also have an asexual pride button, a Roy G. Biv button, and it's just a simple way of showing your support. Every week people tell me, I like your buttons. And what they mean is they like the queer buttons. And it's an acknowledgement that they see me trying to make this space more welcoming, and I see them and acknowledge them, and I know that we are doing something good together and that this library is a good space for them. Also consider the displays or games that you have out. Do you put LGBT friendly books and media on your displays year round? Or do you only do it during Pride Month or LGBT History Month, which is in October? In terms of games, do you put games out with LGBT supportive companies? Do you put video games out with queer characters? Simple things like that. Jenny and I have put these wonderful pride owls in our teen space that Jenny made. They're beautiful. And we cut out some pride flags and just put them on with some string. From left to right, we have the rainbow flag, the trans flag, the pan flag, and I believe the polyamorous flag. These just show that the teen space is queer welcoming and queer friendly. We also maintain book displays where we try to put diverse titles, authors of color, LGBT authors, LGBT characters, etc., that are out year round. And so by choosing to put these materials on display year round or putting stuff on your name tag, you can show that the library is trying to be a safe space for the LGBT community and that someone in that library cares.
So Bri talked before about vocabulary in different terms, and so sometimes some of those things might be things you have to practice if you're not used to talking about gender as being cisgender or transgender or something like that. But there are other parts of your language that you can practice and tweak to be more welcoming all the time. So you don't need to use gendered language, for example, when greeting someone else. Good morning or hello there, how can I help you? This is a full greeting without having to add sir, ma'am, ladies, something like that. This is definitely hard to do. It takes practice, but it's good to not assume that you know how somebody would like to be addressed. And it's good to not act as though the default is sir or ma'am. So consider using instead words like friends, folks, hi everyone, things like that. You don't have to use gendered language. You also don't have to avoid it if you do know what someone's gender is. There's nothing wrong with these words. If you know that somebody likes to be called ma'am, call them ma'am, that's fine. But don't use that as your default. Don't use that as your standard greeting. Work on practicing with your coworkers how you talk about other people you don't know. So for example, if I'm going on my break and I need to let Bri know that somebody at the printer needs help with a fax, I can say the person over there in the purple coat was looking for a cover sheet for the fax, instead of saying the woman over there, because maybe I don't know and I'd be accidentally misgendering them at the time. Again, you don't have to avoid using he and she for people that you know use he or she, but try to think about using they for people that you haven't met yet and you don't know what their pronouns are. That's a great reason to practice introducing yourself with your own pronouns. and encourages other people to share theirs with you, and then you can just ask, and it doesn't have to be weird. This is a good practice for everybody. There are people who get misgendered, and maybe they're cisgendered, but people misgender them just as they go through life and they don't like it. And so it's better for all of us to just practice asking, practice talking to each other. Be mindful of language in a situation also where you're talking about the parents or caregivers of children. You don't have to say moms and dads. You can say parents and caregivers. This is inclusive for families that have only moms or only dads or have non-binary parents. And it can be inclusive of families that don't have caregivers that use terms like mom or dad. Maybe they're aunts and uncles, or maybe they're somebody else. So we also want to talk about language when you're directing people and doing those other library things like RA and reference interviews. So directing people to bathrooms, you don't want to assume that the person who's talking to you, that you know if they want the men's room or the women's room. Obviously, we hope that you can have a gender neutral space in your library, like the sign that we see on this slide here. So this sign welcomes people of all abilities and people of all genders to use the facilities. Not every library has the ability to do this, but practice directing people to the bathrooms in general rather than to the ladies' room or the men's room. If you have gendered bathrooms, you might want to include period products in both bathrooms or in all gendered bathrooms, because you don't know who would or wouldn't need them. And when I'm talking about inclusive RA and reference interviews, this is again about not assuming a default. So if somebody comes up to you, don't expect that you know what they're looking for. So for example, in the teen space, somebody comes to me and is looking for romances. I don't have to wait for them to ask me for queer romances. I can offer them to begin with. And then of course, there are people who want to see themselves in the books that they're reading, and somebody who doesn't identify as queer maybe is looking for a heterosexual romance. That's fine. We're not trying to stop anybody from getting the books that they want. But what we are trying to do is stop assuming a default of, well, they might not want this kind of book, so I'll just offer the standard, boy-girl romance or something like that. And reference questions too. You've got somebody coming in for homework and searching for a biography, and you might think, well, this kid might not want this famous queer person from history or this famous person of color from history. I'm assuming they want, this sports star because they've got a baseball on their t-shirt or something. You don't have to do that. Of course, obviously, if we're good at our reference interviews, we are asking them what they want. But if you've ever done this with teens, sometimes they just stand there and look at you and you have to start throwing things at them. Try this one, try this one. So in those situations, offer diversity first until you hone in on what they want. So we are right at the end here. I wanted to share one last Happy story from ArcUSA. This is from posts on our Instagram. This is kind of a combination of community and support and readers advisory and everything that's good about the library. That we had a teen come to us and say that they really loved this webcomic, but the author lived in the UK and they weren't publishing it in the US yet, but they're doing a giveaway online, so can you enter for your library? They're doing a giveaway to libraries to send a book. And we got a copy sent to us from Alice Hostman, author of Heartstopper, which is now published in the US up to volume 3, and 4 is coming. And the kids were very excited, and we did some read alouds of the comic in the print version, and we tagged her on our Instagram, and she, said she was glad we liked it, and the kids obviously super loved this, and so did we. So we had a great little community moment of reading in libraries and LGBTQ support.
Okay, just with the last couple of minutes that we have left, here are our takeaways from this presentation. If you remember nothing else, please remember these things. Firstly, that everything is a spectrum, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. One person who identifies one way is not going to have the same experience as a person who identifies with the same label. No one person is a catch-all, be-all. Being a supportive space changes lives. We have the GLSEN data, the Trevor Project, and other sources to back this up. You can change lives and maybe keep someone alive just by showing that you are being inclusive and supportive in your space. And as we've said multiple times, have respect for these communities, make an effort to understand them, and have a genuine attitude while you're doing so. And we also have resources at the end of these slides that include literature and national and local Idaho organizations. And now, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Bri. Thank you, Jenny. While we're waiting for folks to type in their questions, I know it always feels weird to wait. But we gotta wait for folks to type in their thoughts. I wanted to say that I thought Roy G. Biv is the cutest little critter to add to your group meetings, and I love the idea that they work as a talking tool as well as a mascot, so it's like a dual purpose object. Where did you find him or them? Sorry.
This was a Walmart lottery $5 bin kind of,
Nice.
I was shopping for snacks and I was like, oh, we need this too. And then we had one of our liveliest meetings ever as they all fought to, choose the winning name, and we were voting and we were nominating names, and it was
a time.
A lot.
It got intense.
And Roy's birthday's coming up.
Yes.
We had a picture on an earlier slide of us celebrating a birthday. The kids super love it. I think I saw.
Yes, we already have a question. What kind of guest speakers do you have attend your GSA meetings? So I mostly coordinate that when we had them. We were able to get some people from the community center in Boise, which is a LGBT community center. We were able to get the person who ran, he does not anymore, their youth group at the time to come. We also got people who were members of PFLAG and other organizations, as well as a local queer author who had published a memoir about being queer spawn in Idaho with a closeted parent, and various other people who are queer adults that I knew in the community. I also talk about my own experiences when the day celebrating my identities come up, to also show that, hey, we're here in the library too.
Right in front of you. We also had a question from Amber. In outreach services, hoping to partner with a local Pride Center, do we have any thoughts in moving inclusive library services into community spaces? Are you thinking about working with youth or all ages? I wonder. One of the great things about our group is that we get kids from different schools, so that's one of the ways that we're connecting kids, that they don't all know each other. In one school, it kind of is one of the things where a lot of the queer kids already know each other, but they come to the library and they meet kids from other schools, so we're able to kind of expand our community. But my thoughts about moving spaces, library services and community spaces is, I think it's a good fit for what you're already doing. If you're doing embedded librarianship, you're just being inclusive in you're offering the kinds of suggestions for resources, like we said, or you're displaying, welcoming doodads on your lanyard. Bri, did you have something to say for that one?
If you really want to go above and beyond, it's always possible to ask the community spaces if you can do something that is LGBT specific, like a QSA program, or maybe just a program that is an arts and crafts rainbow and thus targeted towards the LGBT community. Not every community space is going to be welcoming of that, but you'd be surprised at how many people will actually say yes. And it can be a very fun experience. And you can also leave flyers that have LGBT symbols like the rainbow or the trans flag and smaller things like that. And embedded librarianship is probably going to be your biggest thing.
One of our most successful programs that wasn't QSA for our queer kids was an alternative dance that we did, an after-hours program at our library, and we decorated the whole, program room with lights and music and things like that. And that wasn't our goal to only target LGBTQ kids, but that was our biggest audience of who came to this alternative dance. So events like that feel a little bit counterculture and welcoming will maybe attract those that audience, whether you're only targeting that audience or not.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question from someone. Love to add, we have a tabletops games program, love to add some inclusive board games. Can you recommend some? You know more about board games than I do, Jenny.
I do. We honestly, that's a question that maybe I can think on it. Leave your email. But so one of our best ones was we did a rainbow unicorn one-shot D&D campaign this past Pride Month that was very, very popular. You maybe already know this if you do tabletop gaming, but role-playing games are a really common way for kids and adults, for that matter, to explore identities that they don't know if it fits them or not. So a lot of times somebody who's trans who hasn't come out has had experience playing a opposite gender character in a role-playing game. So giving those kind of opportunities is really great. And when we did this Pride one, the kids liked that we labeled it as such so that they felt more comfortable doing that kind of exploration in the group than they would in our regular open to everyone D&D game. This one was open to everyone too, but when it said rainbow on it, people knew what was going to happen, and it was sparkly and unicorny, and it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. As I didn't even participate, I just watched.
You just saw us out there on the patio whooping it up.
Yeah. And you can turn any game gay, I guess. So a good way to put it is add some rainbows on it and you're good, basically. And if
we do a lot of party games. So yeah, so in games you kind of choose topics. Super Fight, the kids really like. Code Names, the kids really like. There's a game that you can get the PDF online. It's called Bring Your Own Book. And if you bring books about queer characters or by queer authors, then you're making it queer. And so this is one of those games that's kind of like a apples to apples or Cards Against Humanity style, where people you know, there's a prompt, you find an answer to the prompt in the text of your book, you vote on who's got the best prompt, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Ah, thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. That was fast. I believe the slides are going to be posted. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, usually I include a link to the slides that goes along with the video as well.
Great. We also have about 4 slides of resources on this, so be sure to check those out, as well as for some good reading recommendations.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bri and Jenny. I just have a couple closing words before we adjourn for the day. So at the end of this session, you're going to be prompted to complete a survey, and we always appreciate your honest feedback. We're going to send you a link to the recorded version of this session in about a week. That'll have a link to the slides and also a link to some of the resources that we talked about today. There'll also be a link in that email to look at our other previous webinars and to look at the upcoming ones as well. Speaking of which, our next Info2Go webinar is on findhelp.org. It's a new resource for connecting patrons to local support services. So thank you everybody for coming today to today's webinar. Thank you, Bri and Jenny, so much for sharing your expertise. Thank you for Meridian Library District for letting us borrow you for an hour. And I appreciate you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
To you, thanks.